Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going over my TBR for Victober. Victober is a month-long readathon where basically for the entire month of October you just read Victorian literature. It's great. I've never done it before and so I'm excited. So during Victober there are reading challenges and there's also 2 books that we read as an entire group. And there's like group discussions on Goodreads and all this fun stuff. For the group reads they're actually reading 2 plays which are both by Oscar Wilde, who I just have been wanting to read his complete works for so long now because I read The Picture of Dorian Gray a while ago and I loved it. I've got all his books on my TBR but I just haven't gotten around to them. And The Picture of Dorian Gray was so great that I just want to keep going, but I've never found a reason to, and so it's like a great excuse just to finally sit down and read The Importance of Being Earnest and A Woman of No Importance. So for Victober I have picked out 6 books that I'm planning to read, and most of these go along with the challenges. I think I skipped one of the challenges, but I can't remember. So the first challenge from Angie is to read a book by a Victorian female author. Bonus if it's one that's new to you. I'm still pretty new to Victorian literature. I generally stick to the 20th century when it comes to classics. So I'm going with a pretty basic author, which is Elizabeth Gaskell, and I'm going to be reading North and South. I picked this one because I loved Pride and Prejudice and I'm really interested in the Industrial Revolution. That's one of the main reasons I'm interested in the Victorian era because I think it's got there's a lot of parallels in the attitudes people had towards it that we're having currently to this digital age, and how Facebook and all of these things are shaping and changing the way that we live our lives, the way that we do our jobs. And I think the way that the Industrial Revolution affected people's jobs very obviously is the same way that this digital revolution is affecting people's jobs and changing people's jobs. And I think when I see a lot of panic around, oh no, we're going to lose all our jobs, I kind of think, well, when the Industrial Revolution happened everyone said the same thing, but they didn't, because new jobs cropped up and it worked out pretty well, apart from global warming, but that's fine, it's fine, it's fine. So despite me thinking that every single time I see any argument about the digital revolution being brought up, I've never actually really delved into the Industrial Revolution, and I feel like North and South is going to be that perfect bridge between a happy, well not really happy, but a happy little romance. It's Elizabeth Gaskell. She's known for writing pretty wholesome stories, but also she's brought in some politics, and I think it'll be a nice little mix. And I'm also excited because I know that she was friends with Charlotte Bronte. She actually wrote Charlotte Bronte's biography after she passed away, so it'll be interesting to compare her work to Villette and Jane Eyre, which are the 2 Charlotte Bronte books I've read already, and also maybe compare it to Wuthering Heights and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall to see if their writing styles influenced each other. And I know that they did have contact while they were writing, so it'll be interesting to see if I can see that in the work, whether there's any effect on the actual book. So the next challenge is Katie's challenge, which is to reread a Victorian book. And I've kind of got 2 of these for that challenge. One is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and the other one is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I cannot actually remember if I have read this book or not. I know there have been definite times when I've sat down and read this book, and I think I have completed the entire thing, but I read it each part so far apart that it almost doesn't count as a read through of it. So I threw in The Picture of Dorian Gray just to make sure my bases were covered. Great Expectations. I am not a big Charles Dickens fan. I try and sit down and read his books all the time, but I just never really get into them. I just find them too long. And this is one of his shorter books, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to get through it. And I think it's a pretty, of all of the Dickens novels, it's one of the easier ones. It's not the Pickwick Papers. And I'm also excited because the main love interest is called Estella. I love it when characters have my name. Like, I always get so excited because my name's not as like common. Even though Stella is like one letter off, it's still my name. Okay, I'm counting it. And then the picture of Dorian Gray is obviously iconic. It's just iconic. I feel like this is one of the most basic classic books. I feel like a lot of people have read this. And a lot of people will read this as one of their few classics. Like, if they only pick up 5 or 6 classics in their entire life, this is probably going to be one of them. And it was one of the ones I started with, so it'll be interesting to reread it because I did read it a long time ago actually. It'll be interesting to reread and see if my opinions of it had changed, if I get anything new out of it. I also haven't read this in so long that I've forgotten a lot of the plot, so I'm really excited to like delve into it. I can remember the beginning, I can remember a bit of the middle, and I can remember the very last scene, and that's it. This book is about a man who paints a picture of this dude called Dorian Gray, and Dorian Gray is basically a hottie Mr. Hot Pants. He is like the hottest of the hottest. He is like Channing Tatum. He is the most beautiful person on the planet. Like think of the most attractive person you know, and that's Dorian Gray. Basically he's kind of curses himself. It's never really made clear how it happens. He does say something which is like, oh, I'd sell my soul to, I can't remember the exact line. I can't remember anything. I can't remember exactly what he said. But it was something along the lines of like, I'll sell my soul to like look like this dude for the rest of my life. And lo and behold, he does. And so as he lives his life, he doesn't grow old, he doesn't age, he doesn't get any like ugliness at all. Whenever something bad happens, it affects the portrait. As he grows older, it's in the portrait. It's not on him. It's all like, so by the end of the novel, you've got this really grotesque, ugly man in this portrait, and Dorian Gray is looking hot as a... He's still looking like Channing Tatum. He's still out there living his life. I love how just Oscar Wilde writes and everything. I just love everything. It's also a really short one as well, which I do appreciate in a classic novel. You never get short classic novels, especially in the Victorian era. They come about a bit more in the 20th century, but not really in the Victorian era. So the next challenge is to read a book under 250 pages or dash and over 500 pages. I'm just going to go with under 250 pages, and I've picked out 2 for this. I've picked out To Be Read at Dusk by Charles Dickens, and I'm probably only going to pick this up if I enjoy Great Expectations. I'm still very umming and ahhing about whether I like Charles Dickens as a writer. I don't think I've read it enough of him to actually make an informed decision yet. I think because I have read a lot of Charles Dickens, but I've never completed, and I feel like until I complete, I can't have an opinion. So I will read this based off of my enjoyment of Great Expectations, but I mean, it's little, so I might read it even if I hate Great Expectations. We'll see. And then the next one is a poetry collection, which is just a whole bunch of poems by Emily Dickinson. It's number 114 of the Little Black Classics series by Penguin, and it's just... I've read this before, but I haven't read it properly through. I tend to just dip in and out of poetry. I never really sit down and read the whole book, the whole collection cover to cover. I think the only one I've ever done that for is Ariel by Sylvia Plath, and Sylvia Plath is just iconic, and so of course I've read it cover to cover. But Emily Dickinson did actually influence Sylvia Plath a lot, and because Sylvia Plath is one of my favourite authors, I thought it would be interesting to properly sit down and actually think about the influence that Emily Dickinson had on Sylvia Plath. So yeah, maybe next month I'll pick up Ariel again and just compare them. Who knows? And the next one is Lucy's Challenge, which is my favourite challenge by far. It's to read an underrated Victorian book from the same year as your favourite Victorian classic, which is a bit complicated. And so I went on Wikipedia and I looked up books that were published in, I think it's 1847, which is the year that Jane Eyre was published. I just kind of just died a little inside because the first thing that came up was Vanity Fair, which I DNF'd a couple weeks ago because, oh my word, that book went on for way too long. The first book that came up was a flop, and then I was like, oh, this one looks interesting, The Sin of Marie Antoinette. But that wasn't published in a Victorian place, it was published in France, so I can't put it in the pile because it's not Victorian. And then I was like, oh look, The Poverty of Philosophy by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. I was like, oh, that'll be interesting, and then I remembered, wait, they're Russian. Same problem again. And so I ended up scrolling right down to the end of the Wikipedia page, and I found out that the first ever book published by Anthony Trollope was published in 1847, which is
The McDermotts of Ballycloran.
And I was kind of like, oh, it's Anthony Trollope. That's not really an underrated book, is it? But actually, the first thing that comes up on Wikipedia is this book was an epic fail when it was published, like, basically, in fancier language than that. But it basically said that when it was first published, nobody wanted to read it. And then when I looked on Goodreads, it only had a 3.5 star rating, and I was like, that's a bit interesting. Maybe it is an underrated classic. But then at the same time, even though it was a 3.5, a lot of the top reviews were like really praising it and like just singing its praises, saying that it was a complete surprise and that they weren't expecting it to be so good. And normally if you have a lower rated book on Goodreads, you've always got at least one review on that top sort of section that is negative, but like actually spells out why it's negative. And the only negative reviewers on there were just kind of blasé about it. They weren't really like, oh, it was bad. They were just kind of like, it was just eh. So I thought, I mean, I could just read an eh book, and if it's eh. So we're going with Anthony Trollope. And so that is all the books that I am planning to read for Victober this month. Yeah. Hope you enjoyed my TBR. I will see you in another video, I guess.